Of ancient Israel, a powerful story unfolds around one man, Elisha, a man whose power made kings fear him and the faithful cling to hope. He purified poisoned waters, brought the dead to life, and blinded entire armies, leaving his enemies both terrified and awed. Every miracle deepened the mystery around him. Who was this prophet with the power of heaven, yet the heart of a humble servant? Even after death, his impact rippled through history. This is the story of Elisha, a dark, thrilling journey of faith and miracles that will keep you questioning what lies beyond human limits. Of Abel Mahola. His name meant, God is salvation. And from an early age, it was clear that he was destined for something extraordinary. He grew up helping his father plow the fields, living a quiet and simple life. However, everything changed one day when the renowned prophet Elijah, a fierce man of God, threw his mantle upon Elisha, symbolically calling him to follow. Elisha left everything behind, his family, his livelihood, and his home, knowing that this was the start of a divine journey. Elisha became Elijah's disciple, learning from one of Israel's greatest prophets. His devotion to Elijah was unwavering, and he followed him everywhere, even when Elijah tried to send him away. Elisha knew Elijah's time was coming to an end, and he refused to leave his side. If they crossed the Jordan River, Elijah struck the water with his mantle, parting it miraculously. As they walked on dry ground, Elisha asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Elijah promised it if Elisha witnessed his departure to heaven. Moments later, a chariot of fire appeared, taking Elijah up in a whirlwind, leaving Elisha to carry on his mission. As Elijah ascended to heaven, his mantle fell, and Elisha picked it up, now clothed with divine authority. He returned to the Jordan River and struck the waters as Elijah had, parting them in the same miraculous way. The prophets who watched from afar recognized that the spirit of Elijah rested on Elisha. This was his first miracle, a sign that God was now working through him. The once quiet farmer was now God's chosen prophet for Israel, and the miracles were just beginning. Elisha's first public miracle took place in the city of Jericho. The people complained that the water was bad and the land was unproductive. Elisha asked for a bowl of salt, threw it into the spring, and declared that God had healed the waters. Instantly, the water was purified, and the land became fruitful once again. This miracle solidified Elisha's role as a prophet, who not only spoke God's words, but also wielded his power to bring restoration and life. As Elisha traveled from Jericho, a group of boys came out of the city and mocked him, calling him bald head. They insulted God's prophet, not understanding the gravity of their words. In a sudden act of judgment, Elisha cursed them in the name of the Lord, and 2 bears came out of the forest and mauled 42 of the boys. This terrifying event served as a reminder that mocking God and his servants would not go unpunished, establishing fear and respect for Elisha's authority. A widow approached Elisha, desperate for help. Her husband had died, leaving her in debt, and her creditors were coming to take her 2 sons as slaves. Elisha asked what she had in her house, and she replied, "Nothing except a jar of oil." He instructed her to borrow empty vessels from her neighbors, and then to pour oil into each one. Miraculously, the oil continued to flow until every vessel was full. She sold the oil, paid her debts, and saved her sons from slavery. Through Elisha, God had provided in her time of need. In the town of Shunem, a wealthy woman showed great hospitality to Elisha by offering him a room in her house whenever he passed through. Out of gratitude, Elisha promised that she would have a son, despite her old age. A year later, she gave birth to a baby boy. However, tragedy struck when the boy suddenly died. The woman hurried to find Elisha, who returned with her and prayed over the child. In a moment of divine power, Elisha stretched himself over the boy, and the child's life was restored. This miracle demonstrated the power of faith and the mercy of God. During a famine, Elisha gathered with other prophets and instructed them to make a stew. However, one of the men unknowingly added poisonous wild gourds to the pot. As they ate, they realized something was wrong and cried out, "Man of God, there is death in the pot." Elisha calmly added some flour, and the poison was neutralized. The stew became safe to eat, once again showing how God's power through Elisha could turn death into life. Elisha's miracles continued during the famine. A man brought him 20 loaves of barley bread as an offering. Elisha instructed his servant to give it to the people, but the servant protested that it wasn't enough to feed 100 men. Elisha, with faith, declared that the Lord had said, "They will eat and have some left over." Miraculously, the bread multiplied and everyone ate their fill, with leftovers remaining. This foreshadowed even greater miracles of provision to come in Israel. Naaman, a commander in the Syrian army, suffered from leprosy. Upon hearing of Elisha's miracles, he traveled to Israel seeking healing. Elisha instructed him to wash 7 times in the Jordan River. At first, Naaman was furious, expecting a more dramatic healing, but his servants convinced him to obey. As he dipped himself in the river, his skin was miraculously restored, becoming as clean as a child's. Naaman, humbled and grateful, declared that the God of Israel was the only true God. Elisha refused Naaman's gifts, but his servant Gehazi saw an opportunity for personal gain. Secretly, Gehazi followed Naaman and asked for gifts in Elisha's name. Naaman gladly gave him silver and clothes. When Gehazi returned, Elisha confronted him, knowing what he had done. As punishment, the leprosy that had been on Naaman clung to Gehazi and his descendants forever. This moment highlighted the cost of greed and dishonesty in the service of God. One day, as Elisha's disciples were building a new place to live, an iron axe head fell into the Jordan River. The man who lost it cried out, as it had been borrowed. Elisha calmly cut a stick, threw it into the water, and the axe head miraculously floated to the surface. This simple but profound miracle demonstrated that even in everyday matters, God's power could be revealed, and nothing was too small for his intervention. When the Arameans sought to capture Elisha, God revealed their plans to him. The Aramean army surrounded the city where Elisha stayed, causing great fear among the people. But Elisha prayed for his servant's eyes to be opened, and he saw the hills full of heavenly chariots and horses. Elisha then prayed for the Arameans to be blinded, and they were. He led them into the heart of Samaria, and once their sight was restored, they realized they were surrounded by the Israelites. Elisha spared their lives, and the Arameans no longer raided Israel. The king of Aram besieged Samaria, causing a devastating famine. People were desperate, and cannibalism became rampant. The king of Israel blamed Elisha and sought to kill him. However, Elisha prophesied that within a day, the famine would end, and food would be abundant. Overnight, the Aramean army fled in terror, leaving behind all their supplies. When the Israelites discovered this, they plundered the camp, and the famine ended, just as Elisha had foretold. Years after, the Shunammite woman and her family had to flee due to a famine. Upon returning, she found that her land had been taken. She went to the king to plead her case, and at that moment, Gehazi was telling the king about Elisha's miracles, including the resurrection of her son. The king, moved by her story, ordered her land and all its produce restored to her. This miracle showed how God's favor can return at the right moment. Elisha traveled to Damascus, where the king of Aram, Ben-Hadad, lay ill. The king sent his servant Hazael to Elisha to ask if he would recover. Elisha, staring intensely at Hazael, wept, knowing that Hazael would become king and bring great suffering to Israel. He told Hazael that the king would die and that Hazael would take his place. The next day, Hazael suffocated the king and became ruler of Aram, fulfilling Elisha's grim prophecy. Elisha sent a prophet to anoint Jehu, a commander in Israel's army, as king. The prophet instructed Jehu to destroy the house of Ahab and Jezebel, ending their wicked reign. Jehu, empowered by the divine anointing, immediately set out to carry out God's judgment. He would later fulfill every word spoken against the house of Ahab and Jezebel, bringing justice to Israel. Jehu arrived in Jezreel, where Queen Jezebel awaited. Unafraid, she mocked him from her window, but Jehu called for her servants to throw her down. They did, and Jezebel fell to her death,